at least we've got a backup for our colleagues who can't make it in terms of the recording. I guess the first thing to do as we're in our work this afternoon is to recognise that this is day 5 of your Career Leader programme, folks. So this is the last day we have a workshop together. Obviously, within the context of if you are doing the accreditation, you will meet Karen tomorrow to look at the accreditation related to our work today. But if you're not doing the accreditation, then this is the last part of the program. This is the end of the program, apart from some things that kind of lead in terms of from your reflections and from the actions that you need to follow through, which we'll go to and come back to as we finish our work this afternoon. But this is our day 5, if you like, or our session 5 of our program around your career leader training. What I want to do, if it's okay with everyone, is just take us onto screen share for a moment and just give us a context to our work this afternoon. So you know the kind of things that we're going to be looking at. And then we'll get straight into some kind of conversation about what that looks like and what that feels like in terms of some of the key topics and aspects of our work. So folks, let me just go on to screen share and just bring up our slide presentation for our guide, if you like, to guide us through our Zoom conversation. And let me just put it onto slideshow so we can work our way through it. And let's just pop our little boxes and zoom in the corner there so I can see the screen. Guys, can you see that that's in front of you? The opening title, if you like, which is of this particular session, which is around your last piece of work, continually improve career development in an organization. That's the topic of what we're going to be looking at today. We've got some key themes, and here are the key structure and key themes from our session today. We're going to look at things to do with change and continuous improvement. We're going to look at some aspects of research, because one of the things that helps us continually improve is, of course, when we are aware of and then implement good evidence-based practice. Evidence-based practice, you know, based upon a whole range of different aspects of the development or the continued development of what good practice looks like and is within your career leader role and generally within the careers education, information, advice and guidance sector. So if we're looking at the topic of continuous improvement, of course, we need to be aware of new ways of doing things, new research, new evidence in the work that we do. Other ways of continually improving our work is, of course, to ensure that we are developing our career-related learning experiences for students and our own skills and knowledge through a professional set of standards and frameworks. So we'll just take a brief look at some of those. And then probably the most challenging bit of both this unit or this session and also our work collectively is the inevitability of how difficult sometimes it is to get at the data around what works and what doesn't. In other words, how we evaluate. Sorry?
Sorry, that's the radio. I'll turn my radio.
Someone needs their hockey stick.
Yeah, it's okay. There's something to do with hockey. I kind of picked that up, but the evaluation of our work, folks. So in other words, what are we doing to evaluate whether the programs that we're offering students, the learning experiences that we're offering students are actually delivering what we think that they're delivering? And indeed, are they enhancing the skills, knowledge and understanding of students in relation to their career development, their career decision-making, their career management skills, their opportunity awareness, and all of those learning outcomes that we want students to be able to increase because of those experiences. And then we'll kind of bring the program to an end by looking at some end of program tasks, which include, just as a kind of a note to be thinking about, a fairly detailed professional discussion with me. Probably now, as we're kind of butting against the Easter holidays here, probably will be after the Easter holidays, where you and I spend about an hour or so on the phone and we talk through what impact the program has had for you and what impact the program might have had for your organization. So we'll talk a little bit about those end of program tasks as we come towards the end of our session today. I'm going to start, if it's okay with everyone, just with this idea, if you like, of continuous improvement. So one of the things that we look at in the aim and purpose of this conversation today is the aim of this unit is to develop yourselves, the learners, critical understanding of the processes of reviewing, evaluating and developing career development work, and enabling the learner, yourselves, to lead the continuous improvement of career development work in your schools, in your case, in your schools or colleges. So the topic for our work today is underpinned by this notion of continuous improvement. And I just wanted to throw a bit of a challenge out, and it's kind of slightly, more intense because there are a few of you in the Zoom room this afternoon. But I guess what I wanted to do is start this challenge of what is another way of describing the process of continuous improvement. If you could think of another word or a couple of words that describe what outcomes you get from the process of continuous improvement, what might they be? And I won't take us off screen share because I can see you all in my little windows aligned to the screen share. But shout out if you've got any idea what the outcome, if you like, another way of describing the outcome of continuous improvement.
Evolution.
Evolution. Thank you, Andy. It's a good one. Absolutely. The continuous development of, the evolution of. And sometimes we describe what we want to do as an evolution rather than a revolution. In other words, we're not just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We kind of want to understand what works and to keep it, and what doesn't work, and make amendments and modifications to those things that don't work. Excellent. Thank you, Andy. Any other words that anyone would describe what the outcome of continuous improvement might be? Becca?
Getting your head around everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna take that argument to its next level. Getting your head around everything and then looking at the fact that everything then changes. So you just get used to doing it one way, and then something else comes along the other way and changes what you've been doing. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is this notion of continuous improvement often leads to continuous change. Because if we always, and I've used this expression with you before, folks, but if we always do what we've always done, we always get what we always got. And if you want it to be different, i.e. better, then this cycle of continuous improvement is going to identify exactly what I described a moment ago, the things that are working, let's keep them, and the things that aren't working, let's change them. So that often involves this notion of continuous improvement aligned with continuous change. This idea that actually we delivered it this way this year, and these aspects were effective and these were least effective. So why would we want to keep delivering it with those aspects that are being least impactful on or least effective? We need to adapt and change those. Now, here comes the story behind this, folks, and why I'm waffling on here to you this afternoon about this. People don't like change. In fact, well, going back to what Becca was saying a moment ago, people get their head around it and then they want to continue delivering it in the same way or using the same material or doing the same thing because it becomes their comfort zone. And as soon as you adapt or change something, you take people out of that comfort zone. And therefore they respond and react to that in lots of different ways. Change and transition is a challenge. And I wanted to share with you a very, very, very famous piece of work, which I am sure a number of you will have already seen in much of the different ways in which you've looked at change or change management before. And it's a way of describing the emotions and feelings that we go through at different stages of change. It's often known as the transition figure or the transition diagram. And it kind of takes us through, if you like, this process of change through our feelings and associated behaviors and actions at different parts of the change process. I'm just going to admit, I don't know who we've got coming into the room, but we will see. Hi, if you just come into the Zoom room, could you just identify yourself for a moment, please? Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello, who's that?
It's Tom. Sorry, I'm late.
Hello,
I've just
Tom.
finished teaching.
Okay, Tom, no problem. Thanks for joining us. We're just looking at change. So the reason why I wanted you to identify yourself is I haven't got you on main screen at the moment, so I can't see who else is joining us in the Zoom room. So Tom, welcome. And what we're just doing here is having a look at a very famous piece of work that describes how people respond and react to change. And this particular model, called the process of transition, here described by Fisher's transition curve, is actually based upon the work of a very famous psychologist of the 1960s and 70s called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed an idea of transition and change based upon her work around bereavement and bereavement counselling. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work has been used to basically describe not just how people react and respond to very challenging and difficult circumstances when they go through a bereavement of a family member or someone they care about. But actually the transition curve has been used then to try and get at how people react and respond to being and doing things differently to how they have been doing things and how they've been acting or behaving. In other words, that these associated feelings and emotions can be aligned to most changes that people go through. From feeling anxious about something and maybe a degree of, oh, something interesting is going to happen next. And then when you realize actually this new thing is going to take you into doing things in a different way, maybe out of your comfort zone, you get a bit fearful, and that fear can be translated into threat and anger. And you also might begin to feel a little bit depressed and unsure that you can cope delivering careers in this way. But eventually, what you hope is that through the right level of support, that you can kind of realize that you have the skills, you have the knowledge, you have the enthusiasm and the motivation to deliver this careers program in a different way, and I'll get on and do it. And I've moved through that transition into a place of acceptance and reality, and a new reality of delivering careers in a different way. I want to come back to this in a moment, but generally, first of all, does that make sense? Or has anyone got any observations about that? Maybe they've seen it before, maybe they've kind of understood it in a different context, but any comments about this transition curve?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think you do have a range of reactions and emotions when you're going through change. So yeah, I think yeah, it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Any other comments? Any other thoughts? It's interesting, I think, sometimes to think a little bit about if you're leading or if you're supporting a group, say, of either subject experts, curriculum experts in subjects, or a PSHE coordinator or deliverer or tutors, that actually there is an interesting perspective to this of understanding when best to support them through some CPD around careers or career related learning. If you were looking at that diagram and you were asked to put against that diagram, where would be the best place to put, I don't know, a bit of CPD around new materials that you provided for them to deliver careers, or just reminding them of the Gatsby benchmarks, or anything to do with supporting them to deliver careers in the way that you hope that they can deliver in the future, where might you put that CPD?
You might put it in either the happiness stage when people are getting excited about things changing for the better, or you might put it in, you might sort of do it as a reinforcing thing for the acceptance part as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think if you can catch people before they go too deep into that curve, and in other words, that you recognize that people will be feeling anxious and maybe challenged by some of the ways in which you might want to deliver something in the future. And if you can provide some CPD at that point, that helps them ensure that they don't go too deep and for too long into that curve. But there's also something about recognizing that if you deliver training at the fearful, threat, guilt and depression stage, what you will have is a room of tutors or a room of curriculum experts. And basically, and I've been here myself, folks, I can put my hand on my heart and say this to you, with their arms folded in absolute disgust and having to attend your CPD session and saying, Now to do with me, this, I'm a history teacher, I'm a maths teacher, I'm a tutor, I haven't got time to do this, because they're still in this feeling of anxiety, difficulty or threat. And you're having to manage that within the context of delivering a CPD session, which often means that your CPD session isn't effective because you're firefighting and you're often dealing with the cynicism and criticism of what you're asking people to do. And that's really important, because what you want your CPD session to have is impact. And therefore, if you can do it at the point where most people, not everybody, but most people have come to the point of thinking, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. And yeah, I think I'll be able to do it with a little bit more support. Then you begin to get away from that sometimes very challenging, and I've still got the scars to prove this sometimes in training events, where you either in a room, particularly in a physical room together with a group of people, and you can see the anger on people's faces, and you get nowhere or very little where in your CPD. So just a kind of an observation. But I guess the other thing that links to this transition curve is to recognize that actually that's sometimes quite the transition that students are going through. And they come back into school after being out of school for a long time, maybe something that you recognize in some of the young people returning back into education this week, or indeed at key transition points, and particularly maybe at key transition points between primary school and secondary school. In other words, that actually when they enter secondary school, they're often quite fearful and feel quite threatened by this new environment. And I often use the expression, you know, that in their primary school, they were big fish in little ponds, and now we place them as little tadpoles in this huge big pond that we call secondary school. And some students find that transition really difficult to manage. I'll just bring Nathan into the room. So Nathan's joined us now, so hopefully he will pop up into the Zoom room in a moment. Is that okay, folks, as a kind of description of a change management process? Another model that we might look at here, folks, is the model that's associated with Kotter's 8-step change model of management. In other words, that if we are creating change within an organization, if we follow simply these 8 key steps, then we're more likely to get our change embedded. And if you remember why we're looking at change, is the fact that if we're looking at continuous improvement in our career work, it is likely to result in things altering on a fairly regular basis as a result of our evaluations and as a result of our evidence about what's working or what isn't working. And going back to that idea that, you know, why would we want to continue delivering something that we've got some evidence that isn't being delivered effectively? So according to Kotter, these 8-step change models are associated with, first of all, 3 key themes: creating a climate for change, engaging and enabling, and implementing and sustaining. And in the create a climate for change, what you're after is presenting an argument, a vision, a rationale for the change, presenting a clear clarity about why we want to do something differently. What Kotter would describe as creating urgency, the need to do something differently. I don't think anyone could think of anything more urgent than supporting young people into the world of work and training and educational options in a very difficult world that we've been in for the last 12 months. And therefore, I think there's a real sense of urgency in ensuring that young people are prepared for this changed labour market and this changed environment in which the pandemic has placed them in. So creating urgency, creating a real importance to your purpose for changing. And then developing those powerful coalitions. So who's in favour of this change? Who can I get on my side? Who can I help spread the word that why it's important to develop this idea that we have? And then translating that into something that people can buy into and understand. In other words, a clarity of what you want to achieve by the change that you're implementing. And then communicating that purpose, communicating that vision, communicating the rationale, if you like, behind the change. And then empowering yourselves and other people to take action. So in other words, deciding what your priorities are for implementing that change, doing some maybe small steps, some maybe baby steps within that change. So what you can do is create some quick wins, some clear evidence of the fact that you're implementing a change and it's beginning to have a positive impact and positive consequences. And then finally, you are using that to drive forward, if you like, the sustainability of the change by building upon what's happening and making this idea that we've talked about at the very beginning so far, which is that actually things are never going to stand still. Because if they stand still, it means that what we're not doing is providing evidence about what is working and what isn't working and addressing those things that aren't working. We're always going to be, and I guess the best expression might be tinkering around. We're always going to be making adjustments, working out for this cohort of this year group. This is going to be a better way of doing it than we did last year, or indeed that we're doing with that particular group. So building that notion up in that actually continuous improvement is a really positive thing. Continuous change means that we're actually being intelligent in the delivery of our work, because we're recognizing those things that need playing around with, need tinkering around with, need changing and adapting as we grow in the work that we do. So guys, I recognize that I've done a lot of the talking there, and we've had a little bit of a conversation about the transition model, and here is the 8-step change from Cotter. What I want to do in a moment is just put you into a couple of opportunities to have a more detailed discussion with your colleagues around generally change management and change management frameworks or tools that you might have used. Now, in your handbook, you also got information in your handbook within other frameworks of managing continuous improvement. And interestingly enough, many of these frameworks of continuous improvement come from a whole range of industrial standards set out by a number of cultures and countries where continuous improvement and development has been a central part of industrial strategy and industrial growth. You can probably recognize from some of those names listed on there that a lot of this idea of continuous improvement comes from which country?
Japan.
Japan. Thank you, Liz. A lot of them come from post-Second World War industrial development in Japan, where the whole country had to rebuild itself after the Second World War. It couldn't manufacture certain things because of protocols established to end the Second World War, to end their involvement in the Second World War. So it had to recreate its whole industrial sector. And a bit like Japan and a bit like the Germans, they kind of started from scratch again and worked out how best to develop manufacturing processes that meant that they were producing quality goods that people wanted to buy, rather than just producing goods that people bought but weren't that happy with. And a great example here, and please excuse me for showing my age on this, but in the 1970s in the UK, British Leyland, who were our state car manufacturer at the time, were producing the Austin Allegro. Now, if anyone owned an Austin Allegro, they'd recognize that it spent most of its time in the garage. It had a square steering wheel. Why? I don't know. And when it turned the corner, two wheels would often leave the road and leave you trying to steer the car on two wheels. In other words, it was a car, but it wasn't a particularly good quality car. Compare that with either German or Japanese cars being produced at the time, the VW Golf, for example, or the Japanese on Toyota or Honda, and you had quality products because those quality products were being managed by quality processes. And that's what a lot of these things do. They build in quality and quality improvements to the ongoing development of products and services. So guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you just to think about some of those models of change and continuous improvement, what you think about the notion of change, how that might go down within your roles in your particular schools and collectively, obviously, as a group, and whether you're kind of aware of any of those models that have been used in aspects of your school or the organization as a whole. Let me take you off screen share for a moment and bring us back together in the main Zoom room. We've got Nathan and Tom joined us now, and Joe. Good afternoon. And what I'm going to do is, so there are 7 of you. Hiya, Tom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to split you just up into 2 breakout rooms and just ask you maybe just for 10 minutes to do a bit of reflection on that input and your thinking around change management and change management models and this idea, this notion of continuous improvement, because that's the kind of the central theme of our work today. Is that okay with everyone? Everyone clear and happy what I'd like you to do? Excellent. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to arrange a couple of breakout rooms. So let me do that for us now. I will ask the Zoom room masters to assign those breakout rooms randomly. I'm going to put you just for 10 minutes into those breakout rooms. I'll give you a couple of minutes warning to let you know that those breakout rooms are about to close. But I just want you to kind of reflect back and think about these notions of continuous improvement and change management from your perspective. How do people generally respond and what models or frameworks might you have used before? So I'm going to open the Zoom rooms up, folks. You are now able to join your allocated Zoom room. Please feel free to talk with your colleagues openly about what it is that we've just talked about, and I'll see you in 10 minutes time. Thank you, everyone.
I just accidentally left my group too soon, John. The text
right,
is in the middle of speaking. And
don't worry, everyone will join you in a minute. Here we go, folks. We're all coming back into the main room. Just wait for the other group to join.
I need to apologise to Bex when she comes back. She was in mid-sentence, and I cut her. I left.
No problem, Joe. You can do that any minute now because they will be back. He says with great confidence that they haven't disappeared into the ether somewhere. I wonder what would happen if I couldn't find a breakout room. They've gone. It's the twilight zone of breakout rooms. No, they will be back in a moment. Here we come. Here we go. And I believe, Joe, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, sorry, Bex. You were in the middle of speaking. I accidentally left our meeting and joined the main room. So sorry.
I'm sure Joe wasn't being deliberately rude, but you know, that's technology for you. You click a button and it's instant. Folks, welcome back here from your breakout room conversations. I just wondered if you had any observations or thoughts from those conversations about this notion of continuous improvement as a culture, as a way of recognizing that if we don't move things forward, we're reliant upon the way in which we've always done things, and they may well be effective in some areas and less effective in others. And it's that notion of actually continuous improvement, continuous change is a good thing, not necessarily something to be avoided or indeed scared or fearful of. You know, there's sometimes a recognition or an acknowledgement in change management that when people see things change, they sometimes see it as a criticism of them individually or how things have been done in the past. And it's about moving away from that culture to a much more embedded nature of the advantages of always looking for an adaptation that could do things better or could achieve better outcomes. So any thoughts or observations about this idea of continuous improvement and change? Bex, unmute. Do you want to unmute yourself? That's it.
Oh, hello.
There you go. Hello.
Amazing. I was pressing the little microphone and not the bit that said unmute. I think it's a wonderful idea to keep looking at what we're delivering and see how we can improve and everything else and develop what we've got and try and get other colleagues on board and everything. But I will be really, really honest and say that it's a whole time thing, particularly for us in an alternative provisions where we're all teaching, like, you know, 3 or 4 subjects. We're all the work experience coordinators, we're all the post-16 coordinators and careers. you know, all that sort of thing as well. So it's juggling it all.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you sit down and you think, wow, I'd really like to do that. And then all of a sudden you get an email that comes in that says, can you write your reports for the end of this week, please? And it's the time management for yourself, not management, but being able to have that time to do it. Because I think reflection is a really positive way of looking at what we're delivering, and we don't always have that time. Am I moaning?
No, you're being realistic, I think, within that, but also kind of recognizing that this is an important aspect. It's an important purpose, if you like, of any delivery of any activity or service, that we're looking at perhaps ensuring that what we're doing is maximizing the resources that we have by ensuring that we're delivering in the best possible way, using the best possible materials to gain the best possible outcomes. And indeed, if you like, there's an argument to go along the lines of, you know, what you need is to be able to very quickly identify and win over key people with clear evidence as to why things need to be done in a different way or why things need to be changed. What you don't want to be doing is wading through huge amounts of material looking for a little bit of evidence that says, actually, if we do it this way, then we might get a better outcome. In order to kind of manage that impetus of change, what you want to be able to do is identify very quickly why and the rationale for that change. And that might not give you any more immediate time, but it might mean that you actually get more support to give you more time to do that. Bex, thank you. Any other observations? And no, you're not moaning, please. You know, this is not about, you know, this is about being realistic and being clear about the limitations of what time you have. Any other thoughts?
We talked about the skills builder stuff as well. I think most of us are on board with that now across the mat, and it's in terms of talking about the wider team and getting everyone's slight improvement in delivering careers. That's a really easy win, actually, I think, because we can do it. We're doing it in really small steps. I've just printed out, and I know that Bex has done the same. We've printed out the posters and put them in every room, which have these skills, which we're trying to use it as the sort of terminology of employability skills. And we've got all the teachers using that vocabulary to try and raise students and in the context of careers a lot as well. So they're raising students kind of awareness of their transferable skills and where their strengths are. And we talk about that in terms of careers and how, if you go to an interview, they will want to know, give me an example of where you led a team, give me an example of where you were able to solve problems. And they are the skills in Skills Builder. So it's not a huge ask for the staff, and we're all doing it. And so it's a nice easy win to get people working as a team towards the right goal, you know.
And Joe, that's really important, I think, because identifying both the quick wins, but also identifying the common purpose, and using that common purpose to rationalize why you want to do, or why you want people to do things in a certain way. And the common purpose here is, of course, clearly identifiable and clearly associated with people's passion for doing the work, which is to get better outcomes and better life chances for young people. That's the driver. And that's the common purpose. And as you just said, Joe, what employers are looking for is situational responses, to build up someone's understanding of actually being able to answer those questions in an interview scenario will absolutely, present them with a better choice or better opportunities for gaining those employment opportunities. And we know that those employability skills are very, very important to be able for learners, for students to be able to both describe and identify when they've done them. Any other observations? Any other thoughts? Okay, I'm gonna test you now. Okay, don't worry, it's not a formal exam. But in a moment, I'm going to give you a little bit of a task to do on your own in the main Zoom room. So I'm not going to put you into breakout rooms. I'm just going to ask you to spend, 4 or 5 minutes in this piece of reflection, piece of thinking time. I guess a bit of a moment of calm amidst the things that have gone on for you this week. I'm hopefully going to give you 5 minutes of your moment of calm for this week. And the purpose of doing that is I want you to think about and consider one of the other pieces of really important evidence around continuous improvement is a recognition that the evidence might not come from your own establishment through your own evaluation of what works and what needs improving. There is a real opportunity to use evidence generated in similar situations and similar positions to your own schools and colleges. In other words, that we can use the evidence generated by research and evidence-based practice to say, you know, this was tested, this way of working was tested in all of these institutions, and these were the outcomes. And therefore, there's no reason to suggest that if we implemented this, then we're going to get similar outcomes. There's an association link here. So it's not just all about evaluation. It's not just all about the data you collect on what's working and what isn't. It's actually scanning the environment and looking out there as to what evidence is out there to suggest actually doing it this way produces this set of outcomes, which produces that set of results. So in other words, the purpose of the next kind of 5 minutes is to think about the notion of research and evidence base. And if you were asked to think about what organizations you might go to, you might look at in order to generate some fairly robust or systematic evidence that actually particular aspects of career interventions work more successfully than others. So I want you to think for 5 minutes. You might even want to grab your phone if you've got one and Google something if you want. But what organizations would your go-to organizations be to produce or to get access to the other bit of continuous improvement, which is, so what else is going on in the bigger world that can prove that if we do it this way, we get a better outcome? In other words, research and evidence-based. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to shut up. You might want to turn your cameras off at this point if you want to grab a drink or while you're thinking, kind of be doodling or whatever else. So I'm going to suggest that if you want to turn your camera and your mics off and then put them back on in 5 minutes time and see if you can come up with organizations that might be your go-to organizations in order to collaborate and develop an idea of your research base or your evidence base. Okay, 5 minutes, folks. I'll see you back on screen in 5 minutes time. Okay, folks, a couple of people are joining us back from that 5 minute pause and reflection. We'll just wait for everyone else to come back into shot and put their camera or their mics back on, and then here we go. Everyone else is popping through onto the main Zoom room. Okay. Where, folks, and this is a kind of an opportunity to share both with myself and with your colleagues, where you might seek some research or evidence base around what makes careers most effective and what you can use that evidence base for as kind of leverage to kind of implement change in the way that you want to. Where would you go to? What places would you go to search for current research and evidence-based practice in career work or career-related work? Any thoughts, anyone?
Are they good career guidance site, the Gatsby one?
Yeah, okay, so there's a Gatsby Foundation site. The Gatsby Charitable Foundation has quite a lot of research on, including, folks, interestingly, the original piece of research carried out in 2013-14, which was an international piece of research which tried to establish what things made an effective career-related learning experience for students. And what they found in that piece of international research in 2013-14 was there were 8 key things that made up an effective career-related journey for students. And of course, those 8 key themes are now the 8 benchmarks. So the 8 benchmarks just weren't created out of a kind of a flip chart exercise that someone had in a piece of, a piece of flip chart in a room. They were actually created based upon international research about what the characteristics that make an effective career-related learning experience. Thank you, Liz. Any other suggestions?
CDI, because you've got like the State of the Nation reports that come out every year.
Absolutely. CDI, the Career Development Institute, obviously both the State of the Nations reports at the CEC, the Careers and Enterprise Company Commission, but also lots of other pieces of research. The CDI have just produced a briefing paper on effective action planning and goal setting for students, which is based upon some evidence, and there's some research and evidence in that document. Yeah, really good place to look for evidence and for research. So the CDI. Anywhere else? Becca. Bex.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of this in totally the wrong way, I reckon, because people have come up with sensible options like Gatsby website and the CDI and everything else. And I was just sitting here thinking, who can I talk to? Because I like to talk to people about it. And I was thinking straight away, you know, who is my go-to person to help me and get information and all the rest of it. And I came up with 3 people that are really important with me at the moment that support me. And that's my Careers Southwest advisor. He's really supportive with me. My Careers Enterpriser, he's really supportive with me. And our Careers Enterprise Coordinator, Lucy. They're 3 really important people for me at the moment. And I do ask and email them all the time. And yeah, I'm more of a person that likes to talk.
Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. And it's useful to have contacts within your network of support to enable you to do that. So that certainly isn't wrong within this context of this exercise. So thank you. That's a really good, interesting perspective. Anyone got any other research establishments that they could share or that they want to share? Joe?
I got, I'm going to sound like a right geek, but I got the Careers Leaders Handbook by Tristan Hooley.
Yeah.
And somebody else, and that's pretty good. It's pretty useful for that sort of thing.
Yeah, excellent. So the Career Leader Handbook by Tristan Hooley and David Andrews. Yeah, a really effective book for this area of work.
There's a chunk of stuff. God, I'm starting to sound like a right geek. There's a chunk of stuff on the House of Commons. There's loads of stuff there, loads of research papers that they've done.
Oh, Andy, thank you, because I've just pulled out from the House of Commons and from the DFE website a really meaty piece of international research about what works in effective careers interventions for students. You can't see this document as I put it up to you, but I will send you a link to it, which is a really useful new document that compares and contrasts against, I think it's 15 countries, about careers interventions and careers programs that are most successful for those particular countries and internationally. So again, there's some really good evidence in that particular document. If you, yeah, I can. Is that Claire? Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, I was just going to say one on the local labour market is the Cornwall Council Economic Growth Service, who do the apprenticeship list every week. But they have research and information on the local labour market for Cornwall.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you, Claire. Really, really useful. If you,
John, sorry, I didn't hear that. I heard it was about the labour market. Could you repeat what that was? Because I need to know about the labour market. I was struggling with that today.
Claire, can I ask you, because your volume's quite low today, could you put that in the chat room and people can copy the details from the chat room?
Yeah, sorry, I've got problems with my video and my 4G. I'm kind of struggling with signal, so I'll put that on the chat now.
Fantastic, Claire. Thank you. Now, I'm gonna suggest some other places to have a look at, and some of these you might have heard of, and some of them you might not have heard of. They're going to be on the recording, folks. But if you want to make notes of them as I'm saying them to you, that's absolutely fine. But obviously they will be on the recording. You may or may not know, but there is an international centre in this country, an international centre for guidance research. And it's at the University of Derby. So it's the International Centre for Guidance Studies and Research at the University of Derby. Managed by, or used to be managed by, a person called Dr. Deirdre Hughes, who's a very famous careers writer in our field. But the International Centre for Guidance Studies in Derby is a really good place to get research and evidence base. We've mentioned the CEC, the Careers and Enterprise Company, and the CDI. There's an organisation called Education and Employers as an organisation, and they produced a really useful document a few years ago, actually in 2019, June 2019. It was called Motivated to Achieve, and it was a piece of evidence-based research using randomised control trials for the first time in careers work in the main, and it proved the link between employer encounters and student outcomes. The more employer encounters a student has, the better chance that they have of gaining employment and training opportunities post-education or study. And this piece of research created by this organisation, carried out by this organisation, doesn't make the causal link, makes the evidence link between employer encounters and solid outcomes or better outcomes for young people in the education and training and employment field. There's the Institute of Employment Research at the University of Warwick, which is a great place for looking at LMI and labour market information. The Gatsby Foundation we've mentioned, and the other two that I always like to keep an eye on because they kind of have a quite a useful, user-friendly set of research and evidence, which is the Sutton Trust. Sutton Trust is a kind of an organisation that specialises in social mobility and recognises some of the challenges and some of the research around social mobility. And also on social mobility, the Social Mobility Commission that also has quite a bit of research on around the impact of social mobility and career-related learning and the aspects that connect with social mobility. So those are just a couple of examples of evidence-based research and evidence-based practice areas that you might want to explore a little bit further. What I'm going to do now, folks, we've got about 20 minutes or just over 20 minutes left. Can I just briefly take us back onto screen share? And what I want to do when I do that is kind of recognize that one of the other ways of managing quality and continuous improvement is to use a framework to do that. And there are lots of different professional standards and frameworks to support, if you like, the identification and the development of effective career-related learning. Some of these we'll have looked at before anyway, but in terms of ethical or appropriate practice, the CDI produce a code of ethics, a code of practice, which is a really interesting document. If you haven't seen it, it's on the CDI website, and I think probably sent as a handout to you anyway within the course. But if you hadn't seen it for a while, or you can't remember seeing it, have a look at it, because it's really useful in looking at, I guess for a lot of work, there's always an ethical base, an ethical framework for delivering effective career-related learning. And the CDI Code of Ethics does that. You've got professional standards framework for your teaching roles, and you've also got national occupational standards, what we call NOS. And there's a national occupational standard for careers guidance work that often appears within the context of the level 6 qualification. And there's a national occupational set of standards for career leader role, a career leader role as well. And then you've got things like Gatsby, we've talked about, and Compass, and your self-assessment using Compass and Tracker. And then you've got some externally verified qualification, so quality award standards or quality standards, like the Quality and Career Standard, which locally is often referred to as IIC, Investor in Careers. You might have heard that as a trademark or as a career standard. And then for some organisations, particularly FE institutions, the establishment of external recognition through the matrix standards is something that other organisations might use as well. Folks, anyone using any of those, or is there any aspect of any of those standards that people are familiar with or have explored in the past? I mean, it's not, it's just there as a kind of reference point fact that I guess what it does in some of these is recognize potentially the limitations of Compass and Compass+, which is self-assessment, in comparison perhaps to an external recognition or an external validation of your career-related learning program through something like Investor in Careers that is owned by the CSW group. So if you wanted to know more about investor in careers, talk to someone at the CSW group, or indeed, you know, looking at the code of practice or the code of ethics from the CDI, or matrix recognition tends to be much more in FE than in a school setting. So just perhaps things to think about in terms of frameworks and standards. One of the last topics that we're going to look at for the last bit of our work today is the very challenging area, and I think it is challenging. It's important to recognize quite how challenging this is, and it's the notion of evaluation. It's that what are we doing on a fairly regular basis to evaluate either whole programs or elements of our program to tell us what's working and what isn't working, what's effective and not effective, what students are gaining from the experiences that we're placing within our career-related learning program. So it's okay, Liz, don't worry. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. I wanted to just put us into one final in a moment breakout room to talk about your experiences of evaluation. Now, one of the things I wanted to underpin before I did that is to recognize that actually evaluation is a very complex area. And in a moment after the short breakout room, I'll give you some support or ideas about what you might do about evaluation. But it might be that you have different ways of thinking about and different ways of creating evaluation methods or methodology. You know, do you do, I don't know, Survey Monkeys or Google Forms with students to evaluate what they've learned in a particular session? Do you do a quiz perhaps at the end of a session to work out what students have learned in that session? Do you gather any evaluation or evidence from key stakeholders, whether it's employers or careers-related professionals, about what impact your career-related learning program is having for them, or what they see as the impact of your career-related learning program? Are you evaluating any measures with parents or carers about what they see as the development of skills that their sons or daughters might be having in relation to the experiences that they're engaged in? It is a thorny issue, and you know, one that we struggle with all the time with, you know, how do you get engagement and real evidence from evaluation, that balance between quantitative and qualitative, quantitative being what we can analyze, qualitative being the narrative or the story behind the data. And it's kind of just an opportunity to really have a conversation with each other about how you think you're evaluating and what methods you might be using that you want to share with your colleagues. So again, let me just, for our final time, both today and in our program, just briefly put you into breakout rooms. I'll recreate the breakout rooms. We'll keep them at 2, and we'll just give you 10 minutes to kind of do this. And just, you know, think about and share your experiences of evaluating either programs or elements, projects or pieces of work, particular sessions that learners might have, that students might have with you. How are you getting, okay, Nathan, thank you. How are you getting that evidence and that evaluation methodology going? So if I can ask you just to have that conversation in your breakout rooms for 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms now. If you could just join your breakout rooms and talk through evaluation for me, please. Excellent, folks. Welcome back. We'll just get everyone back into the main Zoom room. We've just got over 5 minutes left, 5-6 minutes left before we finish today. So let's just get everyone back into the Zoom room. We'll just do a little bit of feedback on evaluation, and I'll kind of suggest some other support that you might want to look at in terms of evaluation, and then we'll start to move towards the end of our work. Folks, welcome back. Just let me open the conversation up from your perspective. You know, this is a difficult area. How much do we evaluate? What do we do with the data? How do we analyze it? Are we collecting the right kind of data? What's your views about how you're currently evaluating, folks? Just give me your thoughts or observations.
I'll be honest, I think ours is, in my setting, we're a little bit ad hoc. The students sort of hate filling in any kind of form, and we get minimal feedback from parents. So, I mean, as a collective group, Tessa kind of organised a survey monkey, so we're waiting for the results on that.
Right.
Up until then, I've got to be honest, our feedback's been pretty poor. Yeah.
No, Andy, I think that's fairly it's quite typical of what we find, and it is because partly it's getting responses back in such a way that's meaningful, and also in asking the right questions in the right way, or creating a much more fun way, if you like, to gather that data rather than just a straightforward questionnaire. Thanks, Andy. Any other thoughts about what you're currently doing on evaluation? I'm glad that Tessa's got kind of that working on or looking at that within that larger trust context. Anything else?
Can I pinch Andy's? Andy said something really good, and I believe as alternative provision schools, we're all doing this. I'm sorry, Andy, for pinching yours, but like at the end of lessons or starters or anything, just to get the kids talking and in the mood and everything else, because let's be honest, they come into your class and they're just like, oh. So yeah, to get them talking and everything else, is verbal feedback as well. You know, what can you remember back when we had the dog behaviourist in? You know, what did he teach us, and was that a good experience for you to see those that employer and all that sort of thing? And a lot of it for us is verbal, but then it's having time to actually write that down and feed that back.
It's a really good observation. I'll come back to that in a minute. Liz, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, the only other thing that we do is we try and do sort of like a half-term assessment of like all the sort of work that they've been doing. So that would include some career stuff, but that's more kind of like knowledge and understanding rather than
okay, thank you. I mean, I think that getting the balance right between things that can be analysed and presented in nice tables and having stories to tell is an interesting aspect of evaluation. That actually those little clippets of student expressed this particular view because they'd learnt something from the last session and it was clear that they had because they described something. That storytelling, that narrative is really important to amplify. And evaluation isn't just about the robust, if you like, scientific approach to getting the right amount of data, the right sampling size, the right control trial evidence within that. It's about the stories behind the students. And I think if we can try and create better ways of getting students to tell us their story of their learning journey, you get a view, you get a perspective, and you get something that people connect to. Yes, of course, the stats look very nice in a bar chart, but it doesn't tell you about the underpinning beliefs or attitude changes that students have been through. And I think that narrative is really important to grasp and to get and to use. Evaluation is challenging. And just to kind of bring us towards our close today, one of the things that I did many years ago, and in a moment I'll put up a slide to show you this. What I did a few years ago was involved, many years ago, at the onset of the work of Connections in 2001, is that one of the pieces of work I oversaw at the department was looking at creating a framework, a simple framework of ideas and ways in which people could evaluate better. And we produced a little booklet. And let me just share this with you, folks. Give me a moment. We produced this little booklet, and it was called The Little Book of Evaluation. And more than happy, I still got a copy of this. As you can see, it's way now old, 20 years old. But actually what it created was an opportunity to really understand more about evaluation methodologies in a simple way, which meant that you could actually draw up that combination of qualitative and quantitative data, recognizing that actually questionnaire design, or however you're phrasing the questions, whether it's in a questionnaire or in any other way, that's actually really difficult. It's really difficult to create the right kind of question that isn't leading someone to answer in a particular way or enabling them to duck the issue by, if you like, going down the middle of a questionnaire and just going because it's the easiest thing to do. So questionnaire design, Things like sample size, recognizing that if you've got a cohort of students, why not, instead of trying to evaluate everything that they all do, why not choose a sample? And as long as that sample is representative, and as long as you've got very clear understanding of what data you can draw out of that representative sample, obviously bearing in mind the margin of error and what they call the correlation of error, means that you can draw some conclusions from it. As long as you've done your sampling and your sampling size and representation in order to be able to draw some conclusions from it. And this book, if you like, takes you through from a non-scientific or non-statistical perspective, how to do a good piece of evaluation. So if you'd like me to send that to you, I'm very happy to do that, even though it's 20 years out of date. And when you see the date on that, it just kind of makes you go, gosh, was that 20 years ago? And it was. But interesting to have a look through it if you were looking at you know, a more systematic approach to evaluation, because what we want to be able to do with the outcomes of some evaluation, not all, as I said before, the narrative stories are really important to grasp. But if we want some statistical data, we want to put our we want to be able to put our hand on our heart and say, you know, this is robust. You know, if we're asking people to change delivery methods or do things differently, we want to put our hand on our heart and say, actually, we want you to do this because we think and we know from this evaluation that this is being effective, but this isn't being effective. So good evaluation enables us to be, if you like, the change champions, because we've got evidence behind why we want to change something. And just following on from that, folks, partly of where we're going to finish in our conversation this afternoon is just as a reminder in your workbook for today's session on page 16 and 17, there's an opportunity to have another go, because it was also included within the other unit on lead and manage, an idea of a force field analysis. And the force field analysis diagrams in the back of your workbook on page 16 and 17, maybe it's just a chance post our session today to think about the driving forces for any changes that you want to make and identifying those, and the restraining forces that might help you implement changes, and then looking at strategies to actually drive those driving forces through and actually remove or reduce those restraining forces. So again, just an opportunity perhaps to have another go at thinking about and considering doing a force field analysis, which might also play into thinking about, well, who else do I need to support in terms of that training that we started at the beginning of our conversation of today, thinking about how that CPD works within our context. My final slide, folks, before I bring the off-screen share to kind of bring today to a close, and I do realize I've gone over by a minute, so I apologize, is obviously the things that you need to complete the training, which is obviously if you're doing the accreditation route, you'll get a session with Karen tomorrow regarding what we've done today. You'll need to do your reflective account booklet, which contains the reflective account documentation and also the other documentation in relation to the case study and the end of course report. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that one of the things that you will need to do with me in order to complete the course is have what we call a professional guided discussion. And these are about 45 minutes to an hour conversations on the phone. There's a template in your reflective account booklet, which guides you through that discussion. And when I tell you about the instructions for setting up these guided discussions, I'll include the link to that documentation. And it's just you and me talking on the phone about what you think the impact of the program has been. And what I intend to do, therefore, next week is put an email together for you all, send that email out, and it will have diary dates and time slots in those dates for you to sign up to a professional discussion with me. And all you need to do is allocate yourself a slot and then email me back with your allocation. And as I said, because we're coming up to Easter now, it's probably going to be dates after Easter, after the Easter holidays, where we have these guided professional discussions. So if everyone's okay with that, I'll take us briefly our off-screen share back together again as a group. First of all, just before we finish, is that okay in terms of both that end of program stuff and anything else that you want to raise in terms of questions or queries from today, folks? No. I guess then it just leaves me with, because I'm not doing your assessment, I'll obviously see you or talk to you rather in your professional discussion, but leave me to say thank you so much for being part of the program. It's been a pleasure working with you, even though it's not been face to face, it's been using this mechanism. It's been a pleasure engaging and facilitating these conversations with you over this period of time. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time, energy and commitment as we've gone through our 5 sessions together over your Career Leader program. So folks, just before we finish, thank you very much for your time and your commitment throughout the program.
Thanks, John. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you. And I will be sending out those professional discussions for you to sign up to, and I will speak to you then. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Take care and speak to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks, John. Thanks,
bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.